1. 4. 3. Humanistic approach. Humanistic view puts emphasis on the positive aspects of life, free choices, and personal growth experiences. According to this approach, abnormality results from refusal to accept personal responsibility for one's own actions and thoughts. So human behavior is caused by the choices we make voluntarily. The humanistic theorists assume that human nature is inherently good and abnormal aggressive behavior is caused by the society but not by the individual. Carl Rogers, along with Abraham Maslow, rejected the deterministic nature of both psychoanalysis and behaviorism and maintained that we behave as we do because of the way we perceive our situation. As no one else can know how we perceive, we are the best experts on ourselves. Like Freud. Rogers developed his theory based on his work with emotionally troubled people, but unlike Freud. Rogers claimed that we have a remarkable capacity for self-healing and personal growth leading towards self-actualization. Freud emphasized the importance of psychological continuity and hence believed our past to be a strong determinant of the present, whereas Rogers placed emphasis on the person's current perception and how we live in the here and now. Explanation. The humanistic view is all about focusing on the positive parts of life, the choices we make on our own, and our personal growth experiences. According to this view, when people don't take responsibility for their actions and thoughts, it can lead to abnormal behavior. In other words, our behavior is influenced by the choices we freely make. Humanistic theorists believe that humans are naturally good, and if someone acts abnormally or aggressively, it's more because of society's influence than their own. Carl Rogers, along with Abraham Maslow, didn't like the idea that our behavior is predetermined by things like our past or external factors, as psychoanalysis and behaviorism suggest. They thought that the way we behave is largely shaped by how we see our own situation. Since nobody else can truly understand how we perceive things, we are the best judges of ourselves. Unlike Freud, who believed our past had a big impact on our present, Rogers believed that we have a remarkable ability to heal ourselves and grow as individuals, moving towards becoming our best selves. Freud thought our past was really important, but Rogers focused more on how we're living in the present moment.
मानवतावादी दृष्टिकोण का मतलब है कि हमें जीवन के अच्छे पहलुओं पर, हमारी खुद की चुनौतियों पर और व्यक्तिगत विकास के अनुभवों पर ध्यान देना चाहिए। इस दृष्टिकोण के अनुसार, जब लोग अपने कर्मों और विचारों के लिए व्यक्तिगत जिम्मेदारी नहीं लेते, तो यह असामान्य व्यवहार का कारण बन सकता है। दूसरे शब्दों में, हमारा व्यवहार हमारे स्वैच्छिक चयनों से प्रभावित होता है। मानवतावादी सिद्धांतकार मानते हैं कि मानव प्राकृतिक रूप से अच्छे होते हैं, और अगर कोई व्यक्ति असामान्य या आक्रामक तरीके से व्यवहार करता है, तो ये ज्यादातर समाज के प्रभाव के कारण होता है, उस व्यक्ति के अपने कारण नहीं। कार्ल रॉजर्स, जो अब्राहम मैस्लो के साथ थे, ने साइकोएनालिसिस और बिहेवियरिज्म के तय किए गए निर्धारण की बजाय यह माना कि हम जैसे अपनी स्थिति को देखते हैं, वैसे ही व्यवहार करते हैं। क्योंकि कोई दूसरा व्यक्ति हमारे दृष्टिकोण को सही तरीके से समझ नहीं सकता, हम ही अपने आप के सर्वश्रेष्ठ विशेषज्ञ हैं। फ्रॉइड की तरह, रॉजर्स ने अपने रूप में परेशान लोगों के साथ अपने काम पर आधारित थे, लेकिन फ्रॉइड की तरह रॉजर्स ने दावा किया कि हमारे पास अपने आप को ठीक करने और व्यक्तिगत विकास की एक अद्वितीय क्षमता है, हमारे खुद को सकारात्मक दिशा में जाने की ओर बढ़ने के लिए। फ्रॉइड ने हमारे भूतकाल को महत्वपूर्ण माना, लेकिन रॉजर्स ने ज्यादातर हमारे वर्तमान दृश्य पर ध्यान केंद्रित किया और कैसे हम वर्तमान में जी रहे हैं, इस पर जोर दिया।
I self and congruence central to Rogers' theory is the notion of self or self-concept. This is defined as the organized, consistent set of perceptions and beliefs about oneself. It consists of all the ideas and values that characterize I, and man includes perception and valuing of what I am and what I can do. Consequently, the self-concept is a central component of our total experience and influences both our perception of the world and perception of oneself. For instance, a woman will perceive herself as strong may well behave with confidence and come to see her actions as actions performed by someone who is confident. The self-concept does not necessarily always fit with reality, and the way we see ourselves may differ greatly from how others see us. According to Rogers, we want to feel, experience, and behave in ways which are consistent with our self-image and which reflect what we would like to be like, our ideal self. The closer our self-image and ideal self are to each other, the more consistent or congruent we are and the higher our sense of self-worth. A person is said to be in a state of incongruence if some of the experience are unacceptable and are denied or distorted in the self-image. As we prefer to see ourselves in ways that are consistent with our self-image, we may use defense mechanisms like denial or repression in order to feel less threatened by some of what we consider to be our undesirable feelings. The self-concept does not necessarily always fit with reality, and the way we see ourselves may differ greatly from how others see us. According to Rogers, we want to feel, experience, and behave in ways which are consistent with our self-image and which reflect what we would like to be like, our ideal self. Explanation: oneself and congruence. In Carl Rogers' theory, there is something called the self or self-concept. It's basically how we see ourselves. Imagine it as a collection of ideas and beliefs about who we are. It includes things like what we think we are and what we believe we can do. This idea of ourselves affects how we see the world and how we see ourselves. For example, if a woman believes she's strong, she'll probably act confidently because she sees herself as someone who's confident. To our self-image vs. reality, sometimes how we see ourselves doesn't match how others see us or even what's really true. According to Rogers, we want to feel, act, and be the way we see ourselves or how we'd like to be, which is our ideal self. The closer our idea of ourselves matches our ideal self, the better we feel about ourselves. But if there is a big gap between them, we might not feel so great about ourselves. 3. Incongruence. When our self-image doesn't match our real feelings and experiences, we're in a state of incongruence. It's like saying one thing but feeling another. To protect ourselves from feeling bad about this mismatch, we might use defense mechanisms like denying our true feelings or pushing them away. For example, let's say someone sometimes feels possessive in a relationship but doesn't want to admit it because they see themselves as a generous person. They might hide or deny those possessive feelings to keep their self-image intact.
1. तारांकन स्वयं और संगति तारांकन कार्ल रॉजर्स के सिद्धांत में स्व या स्व अवबोध की धारणा के बारे में बात है। इसे स्वयं के बारे में ज्ञान और विश्वासों का संगठित संगत सेट के रूप में परिभाषित किया जाता है। इसमें मैं और मेरे बारे में के विचारों और मूल्यों का समावेश है और इसमें मैं क्या हूँ और मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ के अनुभव और मूल्यांकन शामिल हैं। हमारे खुद के इस विचार से हमारे दुनिया को देखने और खुद को देखने में प्रभावित होता है। उदाहरण के लिए, अगर कोई महिला खुद को मजबूत मानती है तो वो आत्मविश्वास से व्यवहार करेगी और अपने कार्यों को आत्मविश्वास वाले व्यक्ति के कार्य के रूप में देखेगी। 2. तारांकन हमारा आत्मचित्र बनाना और वास्तविकता तारांकन कभी-कभी हमारे खुद को जैसा हम देखते हैं वो असल में हमारे द्वारा नहीं देखे जाने वाले तरीकों से अलग होता है या फिर जो वास्तव में सच है। कार्ल रॉजर्स के अनुसार हम चाहते हैं कि हम अपने आत्मचित्र के साथ मेल खाएं और जैसे हम अपने आत्मछवि को देखते हैं वैसे ही महसूस, व्यवहार करें और वैसे ही बने जैसे कि हम चाहते हैं। हमारा आदर्श स्व। जितना अधिक हमारा आत्मचित्र और आदर्श स्व एक दूसरे के पास होते हैं उतना ही हम अधिक मेल खाते हैं और हमारा आत्ममूल्य उच्च होता है। यदि किसी के आत्मचित्र उनकी वास्तविक भावनाओं और अनुभवों के साथ मेल नहीं खाती है तो वे अपने आप को सुरक्षित रखने के लिए डिफेंस मैकेनिज्म का उपयोग कर सकते हैं, जैसे कि अपनी असभ्य भावनाओं को छिपाना या दबाना।
The total experiencing individual, including all feelings and experiences, denied or accepted, is called the organismic self by Rogers. The greater the gap between the organismic self and the self-concept, the greater the chance of confusion and maladjustment. The self-concept of the congruent person, however, reflects the inevitability of change that occurs in the environment and is therefore flexible. Similarly, as stated above, the closer the ideal self is to the self-image i.e., the closer the person you would like to be is to how you see yourself, the more fulfilled and happier the person you will be. So, we can see that two kinds of incongruence can develop: incongruence between self-concept and organismic self, and incongruence between ideal self and self-image. Explanation 1. The organismic self, according to Rogers, the complete experience of a person, which includes all feelings and experiences, whether they are accepted or denied, is called the organismic self. This is like the total you, including everything you feel and go through. 2. The gap between organismic self and self-concept. The bigger the difference between your organismic self, how you truly are, and your self-concept, how you see yourself, the more likely you are to feel confused and have trouble adjusting to things. 3. Flexibility of a congruent self. If your self-concept is close to your organismic self, it means you're a congruent person. Congruent people understand that change is a natural part of life and they can adapt to it. They're flexible in how they see themselves.
For ideal self and self-image, remember the idea of the ideal self. It's who you want to be. If your ideal self is very similar to how you see yourself, your self-image, you'll likely be happier and feel more fulfilled. So basically, there are two types of incongruence mismatch that can happen: one between how you see yourself and your true self, and the other between who you want to be and how you see yourself.
1. तारांकन जीवात्मिक स्व तारांकन तारांकन। कार्ल रॉजर्स के अनुसार किसी व्यक्ति का पूरा अनुभव, जिसमें सभी भावनाएं और अनुभव शामिल हैं, चाहे वो स्वीकार किए जाते हैं या नहीं, को जीवात्मिक स्व कहा जाता है। यह आपका पूरा रूप है जिसमें आपकी सभी भावनाएं और जो कुछ भी आपके साथ होता है शामिल है। 2. तारांकन जीवात्मिक स्वर और आत्मधारणा के बीच की दूरी तारांकन तारांकन। जब आपके जीवात्मिक स्वर, वो आप असल में हैं, और आपकी आत्मधारणा, आप खुद को कैसे देखते हैं, के बीच की फर्क ज्यादा होता है, तो आपको परेशानी महसूस हो सकती है और चीजों को समझने में मुश्किल हो सकती है। 3. तारांकन समरूप स्वर की लचीलापन तारांकन तारांकन। अगर आपकी आत्मधारणा आपके जीवात्मिक स्वर के करीब है, तो इसका मतलब है कि आप समरूप हैं। समरूप लोग समझते हैं कि परिवर्तन जीवन का प्राकृतिक हिस्सा है और वे इसको स्वीकार करते हैं। वे अपनी आत्मधारणा में लचीले होते हैं, अर्थात वे अपने आत्मरूप में बदलाव कर सकते हैं। 4. तारांकन आदर्श स्व और आत्मछवि तारांकन तारांकन। आपको याद है, आदर्श स्व, यह वो है जो आप बनना चाहते हैं। अगर आपका आदर्श स्व आपकी आत्मधारणा के काफी पास है, आप खुद को कैसे देखते हैं, तो आपको अधिक संतुष्ट और खुश महसूस होगा। इसलिए सारांश में 2 प्रकार की असंगति, मेल नहीं खाने की ताकत हो सकती है आपकी आत्मधारणा और आत्म जीवात्मिक स्व के बीच और आपकी आदर्श स्व और आत्मछवि के बीच।
Roman 2. Person-centered therapy. In order to enhance congruence and move toward self-actualization, the person needs to be self-accepting and to replace the conditioned self-worth with truer organismic values. This is established according to Rogers by having at least one relationship in which the person experiences unconditional positive regard, where the person is totally accepted and supported regardless of what they do, think, or feel. The relationship obviously must be controlled or directed not by the other person in the relationship but by oneself. The person, him, or our, or self is at the center, hence the term person-centered. Any relationship which reduces incongruence is a therapeutic relationship according to Rogers. Such a relationship is characterized by one person experiencing another person who communicates unconditional positive regard. Be empathy accepting that another person experiences the world in an entirely different manner from yourself and reflecting back what this is like. See genuineness being oneself rather than playing a role of, say, therapist, friend, parent, or teacher. If a person demonstrates these 3 qualities consistently in a relationship, they are offering a therapeutic context to the other person. If a person feels these 3 qualities in a relationship, they are said to be in a therapeutic, healing, or growing relationship. Explanation: person-centered therapy. To feel more like your true self and grow as a person, you need to accept yourself as you are and let go of judgments from others. According to Rogers, this happens when you have at least one relationship where you feel totally accepted and supported no matter what you do, think, or feel. This relationship should be controlled by you, not the other person. That's why it's called person-centered. Rogers believes that any relationship that reduces the gap between how you see yourself and who you really are is a therapeutic relationship. Such a relationship has 3 important qualities: an unconditional positive regard. This means the other person accepts you completely and supports you regardless of your actions or feelings. 2. Empathy is when someone understands that you experience the world differently from them and tries to understand and reflect your feelings and experiences. 3. Genuineness. This means being yourself in the relationship, not pretending to be someone else like a therapist, friend, parent, or teacher.
तारांकन व्यक्ति केंद्रित चिकित्सा तारांकन अपने असली स्वरूप को अधिक महसूस करने और व्यक्ति के बढ़ने के लिए आपको अपने आप को स्वीकार करना होता है और दूसरों की मूल्यों को अपनी असली भावनाओं के साथ बदल देना होता है। इसे रॉजर्स के अनुसार कम से कम एक ऐसा संबंध होना चाहिए जिसमें व्यक्ति पूर्ण सकारात्मक समर्थन का अनुभव करता है, जहां पर व्यक्ति को पूरी तरह से स्वीकार किया और समर्थित किया जाता है, चाहे वो कुछ भी करें, सोचें या महसूस करें। ये संबंध आपके द्वारा नियंत्रित होना चाहिए, दूसरे व्यक्ति द्वारा नहीं, इसीलिए इसे व्यक्ति केंद्रित कहा जाता है। 1. तारांकन अवशरण पूर्ण सकारात्मक समर्थन तारांकन इसका मतलब है कि दूसरा व्यक्ति आपको पूरी तरह से स्वीकार करता है और आपका समर्थन करता है, चाहे आपके कार्यों या भावनाओं के कुछ भी हो। 2. तारांकन सहानुभूति तारांकन यह वो है जब कोई समझता है कि आप दुनिया को अपने तरीके से अलग तरीके से अनुभव करते हैं और आपकी भावनाओं को समझने और उनको प्रकट करने का प्रयास करता है। 3. तारांकन वास्तविकता तारांकन इसका मतलब है कि रिश्ते में आप खुद को ही होते हैं, किसी अन्य की भावना की तरह नहीं बनते, जैसे कि एक चिकित्सक, दोस्त, माता-पिता या शिक्षक की भावना नहीं बनते। अगर किसी व्यक्ति एक संबंध में नियमित रूप से इन 3 गुणों को दिखाता है तो वो दूसरे व्यक्ति के लिए एक चिकित्सा परिसर बना रहता है। और अगर किसी व्यक्ति को एक संबंध में इन 3 गुणों का अनुभव होता है तो कहा जाता है कि वह एक चिकित्सक, उपचार और विकासक रिश्ते में है।
1. 4 behavioral approach. The behavioral perspective is identified with the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov 18,491,936, the discoverer of the conditioned reflex, and the American psychologist John B. Watson 18,781,958, the father of behaviorism. The behavioral perspective focuses on the role of learning in explaining both normal and abnormal behavior. From a learning perspective, abnormal behavior represents the acquisition or learning of inappropriate, maladaptive behaviors. From the learning perspective, the abnormal behavior itself is the problem. In this perspective, abnormal behavior is learned in much the same way as normal behavior. Why do some people behave abnormally? It may be that their learning histories differ from other people's. Poor child rearing practices, such as capricious punishment for misconduct and failure to praise or reward good behavior, might lead to antisocial behavior. Children with abusive or neglectful parents might learn to pay more attention to inner fantasies than to the world outside and have difficulty distinguishing reality from fantasy. Watson and other behaviorists, such as Harvard University psychologist B. F. Skinner 19,041,990 believe that human behavior is the product of our genetics, inheritance, and environmental or situational influences. Like Freud, Watson and Skinner discarded concepts of personal freedom, choice, and self-direction. But whereas Freud saw us as driven by irrational forces, behaviorists see us as products of environmental influences that shape and manipulate our behavior. Role of classical conditioning. The Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov discovered the conditioned reflex, now called the conditioned response, quite by accident. In his laboratory, he harnessed dogs to an apparatus to study their salivary response to food. Along the way, he observed that the animals would salivate and secrete gastric juices even before they started to eat. These responses appeared to be elicited by the sound of the food cart as it was wheeled into the room. So Pavlov undertook an experiment that showed that animals could learn to salivate in response to other stimuli, such as the sound of a bell, if these stimuli were associated with feeding. Because dogs don't normally salivate to the sound of bells, Pavlov reasoned that they had acquired this response. He called it a conditioned response (CR), or conditioned reflex, because it had been paired with what heckled an unconditioned stimulus, in this case, food which naturally elicits salivation. The salivation to food, an unlearned response, Pavlov called the unconditioned response UR, and the bell, a previously neutral stimulus he called conditioned stimulus CS. Phobias or excessive fears may be acquired by classical conditioning. For instance, a person may develop a phobia for riding on elevators following a traumatic experience in an elevator. In this example, a previously neutral stimulus elevator becomes spared or associated with an aversive stimulus trauma, which leads to the conditioned response phobia. Phobias or excessive fears may be acquired by classical conditioning. For instance, a person may develop a phobia for riding on elevators following a traumatic experience in an elevator. In this example, a previously neutral stimulus elevator becomes spared or associated with an aversive stimulus trauma, which leads to the conditioned response phobia. Watson himself had demonstrated how a fear response could be acquired through classical conditioning. Together with his research assistant, who was later to become his wife, Rosalie Rayner, Watson classically conditioned an 11-month-old boy who is well known in the annals of psychology as Little Albert to develop a fear response to a white rat. Watson and Amp Rayner. 1920. Then, as the boy reached for the animal, Watson banged a steel bar with a hammer just behind the boy's head, creating a loud, aversive sound. After repeated pairings of the jarring sound and the presence of the animal, Albert sure enough showed a conditioned response, displaying fear to the rat alone. From the learning perspective, normal behavior involves responding adaptively to stimuli, including conditioned stimuli.